Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Prof Talk Pod. My name is Becky, here with Galen Clavio, my co-host again. I'm wondering how long I can stop introducing our names. I think forever, though. I don't know. Your experience, what do you think?
Never know. Someone might find the pod for the first time and be like, who the heck are these people? So I think however long you want to do it is fine with me.
In perpetuity.
There you
go. So today's topic, we're going to talk a little bit about different ways to promote our academic work outside of the traditional peer-reviewed journal. Words are hard today because what we were just talking about, we've talked about this a couple times on the show, and this is a little outside of teaching, but still pretty important for people working and faculty working in higher ed, that we write these articles and either we don't write them in ways that people can't access them because the journals keep them from accessing them, and no academic is, or a non-academic is going to buy their own subscription to the journal of fill in the blank. And also, we just don't get very many people reading them, and so we feel like we're doing all this work and we've got these great ideas, but we're just talking to each other. We're just talking to the similar people in our field. So because I know this is something that Galen has experience in thinking about because he's a media guy, and because there are definitely people in higher ed, think people like Ethan Mollick or Andrew Huberman, who have been out there promoting ideas in different settings, a lot of them podcasting. We joked that maybe we're just talking about podcasting for another 30 minutes, but there are other ways to promote our ideas, and you don't even have to care that much about whether you get known for it. It might just be a way for you to share the information. So, Galen, I'd love to hear maybe some ideas that you have on this, because it's something that you've mentioned a couple times during our shows.
Yeah, I mean, so I look at it, I've tried to do this when I was actually researching before I became an administrator. I really, about halfway through my pre-tenure period, I really was like, it'd be helpful if we could spread ideas from research in ways that were more accessible, because at least in the areas that I was doing research in, it's like the industry should kind of know this stuff, or people going into industry should have these ideas, because it was clear there was a real lack of connection, almost like a pride on the industry side that they weren't following what was being done research wise. And I mean, if I'm being blunt, like, I could understand why some in industry didn't want to follow along with what was being done on the research front, because it felt very disassociated from what was happening on the ground. And that's a larger complaint that I've had about our particular discipline for a long time. But I think, first of all, there was for a while there in the 2016, 2017, 2018 range, there was, and it might still exist, but I haven't done much with it in a while. There was this website called The Conversation, and it was supposed to be a venue where you could write an article that summarized your research findings, but did so in a way that was written in more like a popular press style. And the idea was, here's a way that we could get research out to the masses. It would be picked up by, essentially, as white label, stuff by CNBC or whatever, and you would be able to promote things that way. And it was a good idea. I had some problems with how it was executed, but that always gave me the thought of, if you take the extra step and you popularize it in a way that, or write things in a way where it's more easily accessible to a large number of people, that's a good thing. The problem is, whether it's through that, whether it's through podcasting, there's zero incentive in the industry to do any of that, at least in our areas. Now, and there, frankly, I don't know if there's that much of an incentive in other areas of academia, because so much of academia is insular in nature. The academy as the temple of knowledge, essentially. And this idea that you're writing for other people in the academy, you're not necessarily writing in a way that goes out to the masses unless you write a book, and that's a separate thing. But the idea of using non-book ways of disseminating the knowledge that you're having from research, just it's hard for a lot of people, and I understand why, because there's no incentive structure, and it does take, to some degree, the right kind of brain to be willing to take what you've spent all this time in a research article on and then put it out into different formats, because by that point you're really supposed to be moving on to the next set of research, which is incentivized by the tenure and promotion structure.
Yeah, so I have to also pause and say when I was doing research, I still do a little bit, but also as a professor of the practice, am not evaluated on research productivity. I like research. I like answering questions. I'm an inquisitive person. So I do some of it and think a lot about, right, like how could we change incentive structures so that it also matters impact. And I have had some conversations with friends in tenure situations or at other institutions about tenure policies where they do try to quantify the impact of the person's work. And I've, as an external reviewer, read people who talk about, this is how many citations I have, but also I wrote this thing about it and it went out in this trade journal. So I think with even some slight changes to the way that we evaluate what research productivity means and what impact means, it actually is possible that the structure that currently exists just needs a slight tweak to value some more of these other ways to disseminate the information. Now, the negative is if I'm writing my letter for tenure and I'm having to justify what I mean by impact, the way that I might be talking about, I went on 3 podcasts and as a guest and talked about this research and they had this many listeners might not mean anything to the people evaluating me for tenure, right? Because the medium is not something that they have a lot of experience with. But I do think that you're right. The number one barrier is for sure that we're not evaluated or incentivized for doing so. I think if we told the university we were doing this and it got the university a ton of exposure, they'd be pumped about it, but it's not written in our tenure documents. It's not
Well,
evaluated with numbers.
right, and I think you have to draw a distinction between what a university or a campus or a school would be excited about in terms of the popularity of the professors, and what the faculty peers, who are the ones that do the judging in the tenure and promotion cases, are excited by. Because again, unless it is explicitly written down in the procedures, the focus almost always tends to revert back to, on social science, like, are you publishing in high impact journals? Are you, is there a clear sense of your research is important because it's being referred to and cited often? Is your H10 level high, or whatever it is, I-20? I don't even know what metrics they're using at this point. And then secondarily, are you, if you're not a social scientist, or did you write a book? Was the book published in an important press? Those are always going to be the primary metrics. Not, maybe not always, but right now it feels like those are the primary metrics that are being focused on. Not so much are your ideas being received. And this actually, to me, it kind of it hits at a core issue, and it's where you kind of have to understand what it is you're researching. And the reason, to go back to what I said earlier, the reason why I took the approach that I did of trying to podcast about my work, or to write articles about my work, was that I knew when I started this pathway of researching social media and message boards and users of things, and the communication structure within sports, that was not going to be something that high impact journals were going to be interested in publishing. And that was true. So that doesn't mean that the research isn't important. And the fact I'm still getting citations on articles I wrote in 2009 or 2010, which, I don't know, stop doing that, people. If you're listening to this, like, that's old. It's old research now. It's 15 years old. The internet's changed 5 times since then. You probably shouldn't be citing those things, but it kind of paints the picture here, where it's like, you have to be able to spread ideas for new types of research, because oftentimes high impact journals are high impact journals because they are essentially covering minuscule pieces of the same ground that's already been covered. It's intellectually accepted by the people in the industry. But that goes back to the core issue of who are you writing for at that point? Are you writing for the advancement of knowledge, or are you writing to get into high impact journals? Because a lot of times those are two mutually exclusive categories.
Yeah, I think there is a core issue at the whole enterprise that probably needs to be dug into and reconsidered, just generally speaking, that, would also maybe open up the accessibility of people valuing higher ed, because I think a lot of people do perceive us as doing the thing you just said, which is creating knowledge to get published in journals that speak to very few people and have very narrow focuses. Not across all areas. That's probably more true in social sciences than some of the other sciences, because I think, when we look at chemistry and biology and environmental sciences, things like that, they're using that work to drive things like medication and policy more so than in some of our social sciences, and certainly in sport management right now. Um,
Although I will note, even there, you read about these scandals that erupt where you've got 47 authors on a study, and it ends up being something that industry paid for but wasn't properly covered in the conflicts. Like that, those are the kinds of things that I'm always fascinated by in terms of like we there's always this hierarchy of higher ed where everybody feels like there's a more pure intellectual pursuit. Like, God, I wish we were like the hard sciences, and the hard sciences are like, well, I wish we were like philosophy. Like, it's this weird continuum where nobody's satisfied, and everybody, you always have people who are like, well, they do real science over there, and that's rarely how it works. And where I think we need to be cautious is nothing is settled. The whole predicate of social science or even hard science is that things change, either processes get better, or in the case of a lot of what we do in social science, the nature of society changes, the nature of the interactions of society changes. Like all of those things have an impact on the stuff that we're researching, and we need to stop taking for granted things that appear settled. A lot of it ends up being one of those structural elements where you might have something really unique to contribute. And it may be the kernel of an idea. And I think getting it out in front of a broader audience besides just academics makes a ton of sense, because to me, the people that are doing the best research, the most impactful research from a conceptual perspective, are generally the people that are publishing in more of the second and third tier journals. It's
Mhm.
not that their scholarship is bad, it's that their ideas are not broadly supported and embraced by the people that are doing reviews for the upper level journals. But often, like I've seen this with my own research, like stuff that was on in fringe journals is getting a lot of citations now 10 years later because people would not find what they were looking for in the top level journals, and they start going to the secondary and tertiary levels, and they're like, wow, someone actually already did this research, let me update it for where it's at now, but here's a nice basis upon which to move forward. And I think that we probably would find that happening in a variety of areas. But again, since we're supposed to be a foot wide and 10,000 feet deep in most of what we do in research, that also is a lot of it is it kind of hits on the second point, which is like our the stay in your lane aspect of how research is approached almost is intended, I think, to keep people from pursuing a broader vision of what their research might actually mean in the bigger scheme of things. Because you'll get people, I used to happen all the time, people would dogpile on stuff that I would post or be like, well, you're misinterpreting this, or this doesn't actually apply here. You don't have any expertise in this area. And it's like, if there's no unified theory, if there's no unified, piecing together of things, or at least an attempt at doing that, I don't mind people telling me, well, hey, you really need to consider these things. But if we never have the conversation in the first place, you're not really doing a great job of contextualizing your own research into the broader scheme of things.
Well, and I mean, I don't know a ton of faculty members who every quarter pick up the new volume and read it. Most researchers I know read research when they need to do their own research, right? So even within the group of people that we are writing for, it's not accessible. But let's pretend like we're posting on Twitter, X, whatever, about this new study, and I follow 20 communication or marketing scholars in sport, right? And they follow me, somebody sees that, and then you have a place to have a conversation about it that might get them thinking, oh, you know what? I see what Galen did there. I, read something 5 years ago, or in my discipline, I think it could work this way, and then they advance on top of your idea. But if they were just getting the communication and sport issue, they're probably not reading every study in there. So even for the audience that we're primarily writing for, different areas of dissemination of knowledge is important.
Well, as someone who did a 10-year meta-analysis of all the articles, specifically in communication and sport, you're right. Because, and this kind of goes back to one of the things I was talking about earlier, which is this idea of the the broader conversation needs to be about, okay, did we cover this already? Did we cover this methodology? Not that we shouldn't reinterrogate certain things, but what you do see is a real sameness to the approaches that might not happen if there was a broader conversation outside of the journals about what we're doing and what we're looking at and how ideas might actually, lead to different areas of research. I get frustrated when, so I wrote a piece. This was a commentary piece. I think it was a couple years ago now, about how in sport communication research, we have a ton of articles with a methodology of content analysis of written materials or content analysis of photography. Yet the experience for the online user in sports is so heavily driven by video and to a somewhat lesser extent audio. There's very little research on any of that. Why? Well, if it's funny because if you just read the articles in that journal, and this is not to pick on Common Sport does a great job, but it's really more to pick on the people submitting articles, because if you're constantly seeing the same research, you're probably going to submit something in that vein with the idea, well, that's what's going to get
It's
published.
going to get published. Yep.
And so this is where, to some degree, the idea of let's evolve the approach, let's evolve what's being studied. Do you need to find people who share those similar instincts? It's like, well, we're doing all this stuff on writing and we're doing all this stuff on still images. You can't just disregard video or disregard audio as a key area of research. And this is something that I've seen repeated in other areas as well. It's kind of like, if you go into, I'm sorry to keep this so sports heavy, but we've probably got a lot of sports researchers in here, but like pick up a JSM or SMQ, and it's like, how many structural equation models do we need on essentially the same topics over and over again? But there's a quant aspect to this where it's like it's going to get published, so we might as well submit it. After a while, you hit a barrier. I think the only way to get around that is to have a separate venue where you're actually talking about these things in a public space, where you can say, well, maybe we can plug a different thing into a structural equation where we're evaluating a different set of criteria rather than just going over similar ground. But we need to talk about what that ground looks like. And right now, where I get one of the big troubles, I think, in academia in general tends to be, you do a dissertation, you're supposed to become an expert in that field, then you're supposed to go research that thing, and that's you're the child of your research parent in a
Yeah.
lot of those cases. But that tends to lead to a very similar approach in how you think about these things. Could that be affected positively by putting your thoughts into an arena where there's an open discussion about some of this stuff, and how there might be different ways to approach it so that you're not getting locked into doing different flavors of the same ice cream over and over again? Try some different textures, try some different approaches. I don't know if this is making sense in this setting, but that's where I think not being afraid to say, why don't we do this? Even if it just results in people saying, well, here's why we don't do it, because of X, Y, and Z. I think there needs to be a different venue where that's happening, where it's not just academics talking to each other, where instead there's other people in the mix who can say, well, you get industry people or you get consumers who are in there and say, well, the reason why we don't care about this is it only affects a very small number of people. What we really should be thinking of is the broader spectrum of how this affects anything and or within our field. And I think you only get that in a place where you can have rapid exchange of information, not I'm reading this thing that was studied a year ago and researched a year ago. That's the kind of thing that I think there needs to be more casual conversation, and I think you only get that in a setting where you're putting your ideas out there and inviting people to talk about them in real time, so to speak.
I'm imagining a Reddit thread right now. That's what I'm
Yeah,
imagining for real. That's what as we
actually, I
think
think
about
a Discord chat is a better version of a Reddit thread, but it's the same concept. Yes.
well, we might get more people on a Reddit thread because Discord isn't quite as adapted generally right now yet. We'll see. So what I think is maybe worth spending our last few minutes talking on is, I understand that this might be a difficult thing for people to agree to spend their time doing. But if you are interested in getting a wider perspective on your work to improve your work, but also sharing the things that you're doing,
Mhm.
this sounds silly, but like a Reddit thread could be a place where you post about the results of a study and invite conversation and thoughts outside of the current vacuum that you might spend time in. Those may not be academic researchers. Great. Some of the ideas that I've had for research have come from casual conversations with people who are the thing I want to study,
Yep.
right? And understand, or work in, or live in the thing that
Yeah.
I want to study or understand.
I mean, you're you, the collective you, all the people listening, you're trained as an expert in research and the methodologies that will allow for research to be essentially given a stamp of approval by academia. And the but the idea that your ideas should come from other academics doesn't make a lot of sense because I think especially there are some areas where I think that makes sense. Mathematics, academics talking to academics about mathematical equations makes a ton of sense because the average person isn't going to be equipped for that. Sports, media, business. I think you have to have people who aren't engaged in academia who can be conversant with you to give you ideas on things that your brain may not think of because you're not thinking of like a lot of what we do in research is we have to come up with a model and then we have to do the research in a way that's going to provide us with something that's going to yield results. You want ideas that may not fit so neatly into that particular categorization because that's going to allow you to think about new things that are going to push knowledge forward. It doesn't, I think you only get that from talking to people outside from academia. It's also where I've really started to, and when I was doing research, was really starting to embrace more qualitative research as a starting point. Yeah, because I think what I learned in myself was that you know, I can do quantitative research. I can come up with these ideas, but I found it very limiting because you're essentially predetermining what answers you're going to get from the research process. Whereas with qualitative, it allows me to open it up, and it's essentially a structured, approved version of what you just said, which
Right.
is let me talk with people from industry or let me talk with consumers in a focus group or in structured interviews where I specifically choose people. And let me take that and let me use it to craft an idea generation piece that will then be utilized, hopefully, either by myself or by others to go do quantitative research where we can assign some numbers to the likelihood of certain things. That's how the system really should work. But it's interesting because a lot of the qualitative research that's out there doesn't, I think, do a great job of figuring out what questions to ask to get those ideas because so much of it seems to be predicated on academics talking to other academics, not necessarily talking to other academics and the broader area that you're researching. And I think that that's a key element that will lead to better research overall. I think you have to get your ideas out there, though, so that you can get people to start that conversation in the first place outside of academia.
Yeah, I think, and so, yes, I think that you need to get those ideas from elsewhere, and if you're struggling to spend time doing that, I think you said something important, which is there are proved ways that you could actually do the qualitative work and publish it so you're double counting as long as you're careful about how you structure the questions you're asking so you're not leading toward the ideas you already have, right? So that you're really getting that broad perspective of ideas. Somewhere else too that you might, so I think in the idea enhancement stage, talking to other people makes a lot of sense, and you might need to share your results to get them to give you some feedback on what else they think you might need to know, or what other areas you should approach that research from. If you just are also interested in getting the information out there, we've already mentioned podcast as a way. You don't have to start your own. You could look for people who are talking about this in your area and
Mhm.
pitch them on being a guest. Say, I've done research on XYZ. If there's a social media and marketing in sport podcast, Galen could say, hey, I used to do research on this, and could have some good, information to share with your listeners about the foundations of social media, or how you should be approaching social media.
Yeah.
You also could do, we were talking about Substack earlier. Like, wouldn't it be great if there was somebody who had time to set up a Substack, like, research dissemination place where you invited researchers from all areas and all universities to submit a, however often you want to publish, weekly, submit a white paper, but of like a blog style of their research. And if somebody had the time to actually grow that and promote it, like, that could be a really good place to disseminate information to the public from a lot of different fields. I think that there would be interest in that, as long as it's written in the blog style, TLDR, don't give me the graphs and charts from your research paper. Don't tell me the structural equation model you built. Tell me what it means and why I should care. I think there's a real opportunity there for somebody. And if you don't want to create that for the world, that could be something that you create for yourself.
I tried and I ran out
I
of
know.
time with this. But I look, to go back to the first thing you said in that mix, you and I found each other largely through this process of looking for people who were both motivated to try to share what they were researching with a community outside of academia, but also B, who felt like the median elements of the research was not conversant with the industry that we were focusing on. And we've got other people in this cluster that we've worked with on and off over the course of time. I think this is where you have to know who you are as an academic, and you have to know where your research is. You have to choose to engage in those things, and you have to seek out people who are interested in engaging those things with you. That's easier said than done. And again, you're oftentimes doing it like everything you just said about setting that up and having time to do that sounds great. What's the reward? What's the benefit? Like, are you at a place that's going to yield anything that's going to help you get promoted? If not, then you're essentially doing it because it's something that you feel like should happen, but you're going to have to do it outside of normal work hours because it's not going to actually contribute to your own progress. And I don't blame people, even people who think it's a great idea, who decide this is not really worth pursuing, because I'm not ultimately going to get many rewards for it in terms of tangible items. I might have people in my industry be like, wow, this is great. Is that really going to help? And that's where I kind of feel, I guess I'll finish with one controversial thought. I feel like the biggest challenge to this entire thing that we're talking about finding avenues, whether it's popular press or whether it's a big Substack or a Discord or a message board where researchers come together, the biggest challenge to this is the journal system as it currently exists, because I get no credit for doing all of that work to try to set up dialogue. I get a ton of credit if I'm like associate editor at a journal, which is generally, it's a lot of work, but it's work in service of perpetuating the existing model of information exchange, not just between academics, but between the academy and people outside the academy. We're still set up that way. I mean, I've been in this business now for 20 years. And as much as people have talked about this is going to change, that's going to change, like whatever, I don't see the breakdown happening as of yet in that system. It's still the primary methodology by which faculty are going to be judged. And so I'm with you on the conceptual ideas of why all this would be great to change and it'd be great to have all these things. I just wish we could build some incentives that would actually yield positive outcomes for people who decide they want to pursue the kinds of things that you're suggesting that they pursue.
So the final call to action today is for anybody in administration or within that works within the promotion and tenure committees at your universities. Those things are built by us.
Yeah.
Right? The guidelines for promotion and tenure are built by us. So if this is something that speaks to you that you've been wondering about, it's reach out to some colleagues, see if they have similar perspectives within your school and consider how you might evolve this system from at least the perspective you have. And if you are part of a journal, same thing, thinking a little bit more critically about how we disseminate information and how we improve the impact of our scholarship. So this week's call to action is for anybody who has some power in that. Probably not those non-tenured assistant professors yet, but keep that in mind. And if it's a conversation you'd like to have more of, I think both Galen and I have thought for a long time that this is important, and you're welcome to reach out and happy to engage with conversation and ideas around this. And we appreciate you tuning in and listening to us on the Prof Talk Pod this week. And we look forward to having you join us next time.